Hello and welcome back to yet another installment of Sailor Moon Studies. When we last left off, our heroes were in a dire situation, saved miraculously at the last moment by none other than the virtuous vixen of Venus, Sailor V. With a new potential ally added to the roster, perhaps things will finally go in the Senshi's favor. With the dramatic introduction of Sailor V, we now have a fully established cast for the rest of the arc, barring any major deaths or subsequent brainwashing. I'm really sorry if you're holding out hope for Naru's relevance or Ultra Umino. Well, without further ado, let's get straight into Act 8. As always, we have some full-color artwork to discuss. But seeing how this is one of the more dense chapters, I've opted for holding the discussion of the two-page spread until we hit a narrative lull. I love doing them, but YouTube tells me you guys aren't the biggest fans of them, so we'll hold off on the spread. But for those of you who do enjoy their art analysis, Act 8 provides a full-color page dedicated to the Sailor V reveal. Subsequent re-releases have this particular page in with the previous chapter, although it is far better suited for this one. After all, half this chapter is Much Ado About Venus, which is a title she will not use within this chapter, so I'm going to try to refrain from using it. So whenever she's in Senshi form, I will refer to her as Sailor V. Having this full color reveal after teasing her silhouette at the tail end of the previous act really feels like Naoko Takeuchi is giving this character a proper amount of build-up that wasn't afforded to the other Senshi. In a sense, she's been teasing this reveal for 8 chapters. After all, if it wasn't for Sailor V, there wouldn't even be a manga, but narratively, she's the first character we're introduced to. She implanted the notion that in this world, young girls can be masked heroes of justice. She exists as someone whom our lazy protagonist aspires to become. Ikko even sets this dichotomy up before we're even introduced to Usagi. And that's kind of the role Sailor V will be playing for a little while. This guiding beacon that holds the keys to every mystery we as the readers have for this series so far. Her dramatic appearance answers only the solitary question about herself, but her appearance signifies the true halfway point of this arc. And soon, all the falsities will be answered. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, as we do have one last major curveball that tends to confuse a few fans of this series, even to this day. Will the real Moon Princess please stand up? Artemis informs the Senshi that Sailor V is actually the missing princess of the Moon Kingdom, Princess Serenity. Within the context of the overall narrative, this is simply a plot twist that gets immediately twisted back onto itself, but there's a little bit more to it. If you're watching this video, I'm going to assume you're at least somewhat familiar with this series, and if you aren't, I'm going to be dropping a massive spoiler, but Sailor V isn't Princess Serenity. I know it's completely shocking, but this information is revealed rather quickly, as in the next chapter, so why include it at all? I've seen quite a few different takes on its inclusion, with a lot of people simply viewing it completely on face value. But Venus is the morning star, the light bringer, and with her arrival comes all the secrets being brought to light. Artemis and Sailor V both are aware that she is not Princess Serenity, so why the lie? You'll notice up until this point, the name of the Moon Princess was never stated, just given as a title. But now she's here, has a name, and it immediately gets the noggin jogging of all the Senshi. It also helps that she looks remarkably like the actual Princess Serenity. Sailor Moon has the most dramatic reaction towards just the very mention of the name, altering her tiara temporarily to that of a crescent moon. The name also seems to mean a lot to Tuxedo Common as well, but the full extent of which isn't really shown yet. A fun design element of Sailor V's outfit is the chain around her waist, which is her primary weapon. An interesting thing about the chains is that they are ever so slowly removed from appearing on her person, and they just sort of spawn in as need be as the series goes on. But for the rest of the arc, they're pretty much a mainstay of her character design, making her the only Senshi with a weapon, portraying her as a more seasoned soldier of the group. A design philosophy that gets used once again later within the series to separate a different group from our core cast. Sailor V then cracks the chain at Tuxedo Kamen, and from the action of the art seems to imply that she whipped at his feet. But if you take a closer look, Tuxedo Kamen's hat was knocked clean off his head. Sailor V didn't know who he was, judging by her reaction within the next panel, so she was either going for his head and missed, or she was going for his feet and missed. Either way, he makes a clean run for it as he reflects on the name Serenity, and recalls his previous feelings of uselessness from the previous chapter. Keep that in mind. For some reason, Sailor V really hates those gloves she's wearing, as they've come off twice now within the confines of the actual chapter. Once within the full color panel, they're just falling to the ground, and again within this panel they are once again off. Oddly enough, within the re-releases, the gloves are magically on again by the very next panel, which confuses me even more. Like, why bother drawing her removing a glove, and having it seemingly be a focal point of an upcoming scene, only to retroactively glove her again and go against what you seem to be establishing? It doesn't make sense either way once I explain it, but the implication is that Sailor V removed her glove on purpose and proceeded to touch the other present Senshi, which triggers their latent memories to start up. Which, okay, sure, I guess that tracks. If we buy into the notion that she can help reawaken their memories via touch. So she has to take off her glove and make contact with the other Senshi, which she does by the means of a handshake. Only issue is they wear gloves too. We can see them at least on Mars's hand, so it's not like a skin contact sort of thing. Maybe she really just hates those gloves, and since they're magic, every time they come off they just pop back on when she's transformed. Maybe that's why she's in such a rush to turn back into normal. Thankfully, she does the reader the solid of introducing herself immediately, so I don't need to refer to her by some vague description for a few paragraphs. She is Minako, I know, and she makes a point to say that she's in the same grade as everyone else. She also gets her own little text bubble image that signifies her talking, akin to Luna's cat head, or more commonly Usagi's bunny, except hers is just a little tiny heart. It's not nearly as common as the other two text icons, but a subtle little bit of foreshadowing, if you could even call it that. The hearts aren't even used in the same way that the other icons are, which is to designate who's speaking if the panel gets a little bit too crowded. These are more or less little flourishes to add to Minako's text, but still. Back at Game Center Crown, the whole gang are now formally introduced to Princess Minako. None of this is really new information other than slotting Sailor V into the chain of events and tying codename Sailor V's yet-to-be-written lore into what is now the main story. The long short of it is that Minako knew all the Senshi for quite some time. Given that she meets all of them at some point in time within Codename is a testament to that. She was waiting for the group to awaken their abilities and their memories on their own. But the rate of Queen Mataria's resurrection caused her to try to move the whole project along. While Minako explains the Dark Kingdom's motivation for the 5th time within the series, I'm just gonna zone her out like so and discuss the artwork I promised. This is one hell of a 2-page spread. The text on the panel is just hyping up the arrival of Sailor V, accompanied by the usual advertisements. Nakiyoshi had some sort of big celebration going on at the time, and they wanted everyone to know it. And this spread was its headliner. So much so that Sailor Moon was the first story of the month, and I have to say, Naoko gave them their money's worth with this one. And while it's not my favorite spread of the Dark Kingdom arc, it's closely tied with May of 1992, coming up just a tad bit short due to just how playful that one is. This one, in contrast, is a lot more somber, reflecting the tone shift of this particular chapter. We won't actually see another truly playful spread for a little while, which helps to set this particular piece apart from everything that came before it. The coloring reflects this mood shift in the most obvious of ways, with a dark, foreboding background filled with a black night sky with a waxing crescent moon. That's no coincidence, by the way. Although it looks spectacular from a visual standpoint, it has narrative significance as well, since it is the second phase of the moon as we enter the second phase of the narrative with the introduction of the mentor character, Sailor V. While it's not often we get some symbolism within the artwork, Naoko Takeuchi is just an astrology nerd like that, and I adore it. The main focal characters are also of note, as we see Tuxedo Common paired with Sailor V, accompanied with the moon, but on the other page we see a solitary Usagi with no transformation. No disguises, just her standing alone. When looked at as a whole image, only a small portion of Tuxedo Common's cape and Sailor V's hair are present, which makes the act of placing Usagi by herself a deliberate one. Despite it being a neat visual, it has no real narrative relevance. It's not like the Senshi abandoned her to follow the princess, and Tuxedo Common is still in love with Usagi, so there's no real narrative connection. Although I do appreciate the visual of the moon being over the characters who are transformed, almost making it seem like the moon itself has transformed them. Oh, Minako's done talking? I could have sworn I was dreaming looking at that art. And, conveniently, the whole recap seems to have put Usagi to sleep as well. She seems to be dreaming of some man calling out to her, and this is where yet another crucial name is dropped as she refers to him as Endymion. And while I'm sure all the Greek speakers in my audience are gonna crucify me over that pronunciation, let's put a pin in that one for the moment, as for some reason, Usagi has decided to make a decision so stupid and inconsequential, they cut that shit from Crystal. The whole gag is a page and a half, but since I had to read it, I'm subjecting all of you to it as well. Usagi hasn't been sleeping too well on account of the whole Endymion dream thing. She goes downstairs and shocks her father, who is just getting back from an early morning jog, to which he responds, "This isn't like you." For some reason, she wants to make this a bigger deal than it needs to be, and recalls Minako stating something along the lines of having a secret identity. So Usagi thinks she's hot shit with one as well, and decides to blow it all by telling her dad that she is Sailor Moon. He naturally doesn't believe her because why would he? They don't look similar at all. I mean, there's clearly pictures of her out there. A full picture of Sailor Moon was in the local newspaper, page 4. Maybe he doesn't pay attention to that sort of tabloid rag and only concerns himself with important business. What does he do for a living again? Oh yeah, he's a magazine editor that at one point covered a dinner party. I get it, the guy isn't J. Jonah Jameson, but you don't become an editor for a magazine without a single inquisitive bone in your body. He just goes straight with the, "Sure you are, honey," instead of a, "Oh, that crime fighter girl sure is popular with the kids. I should do a story about her, if only I knew something about her." Which, granted, isn't much of a better joke, but at least it's not this. Trust me, I understand why this scene was written, but you have to understand why the scene was removed. It's a completely pointless scene, and I'm giving it almost as much screen time as Sailor V's gloves. And we can't have that. Usagi then happens upon Mamoru at Ichinohashi Park. I only remember the name of this place because of the conveniently placed sign, but it's actually a reoccurring location. Not only that, but it's a real place as well. You can see the little tube entrance and the fountain. Evidently there was a drama Naoko watched that was filmed here in 1991, and she just kind of threw this in as a little Easter egg. I can't find any footage of the show to confirm if the park looked closer to her version of it in the 90s than it does in a picture almost a decade after the fact, but the show was called Tokyo Love Story. It's research into pointless topics like this that make these videos take so long. But you won't get that information from any other Sailor Moon reviewer, I can tell you that much. Mamoru is reading books about crystals, presumably because he needs to know the weakness of all the gemmed named people. Kunzite's a 7 on the hardness scale. I don't think you'll be able to beat him. It seems to really be on his mind as well, as he looks at Usagi feeling guilty he couldn't protect her. Usagi and Mamoru have this interesting dynamic we see starting to unfold within this scene. They are still really early in their relationship, but we see lingering guilt from their past crop up within this little exchange. It's actually great stuff. Keep in mind, this isn't a boy meets girl, secret identities love story type thing. They have repressed traumatic memories of lives they never lived. It's like going through puberty and then finding out you have the memories of Tsar Nicholas II. And while I'm sure that's probably already a light novel, Mamoru's feelings, while being foreshadowed for this chapter's conclusion, are also setting up Endymion's story as well. Usagi then takes out Mamoru's pocket watch and offers it back to him, where he brings up her handkerchief and the two of them kind of agree to hold on to it for each other until the next time they meet. It's a sweet scene to the utter disgust of Luna. She's drawn with these big, round, sympathetic eyes like she's about to cry at the mere thought of Mamoru taking her girl. Why the hell is she still worried? Is she still on about that Cosby kiss? You know, after saying that out loud, she might have a point. Artemis then appears and tells her that she doesn't have all the facts, and before she tries to cancel Mamoru on Twitter, she better get all the information from him. Meanwhile, back at the Dark Kingdom, Queen Mataria talks to Beryl about, well, stuff we already know for a solid page and a half. Like this chapter needed more filler. Kunzite is looking at the glass caskets of all of his dead friends, lamenting about Zoisite's defeat. Although I'm pretty sure that's Jadeite's corpse. Ironically, Zoisite was probably the only one whose corpse you'd be able to tell belonged to him, since the other two end up being extra crispy, which he ends up being as well. Kunzite immediately decides to take action and just appears at Tokyo Tower in a giant bubble for some reason. I get what the bubble accomplishes, but Zoisite didn't have to spawn in with his. It just activated whenever he got hit by an attack. I guess he's just being cautious, but unless he watched the tapes of the last fight, how would he even know what happened? Kunzite then decides to knock out the power, which really affects Makoto for some reason. Jupiter is in control of lightning, but when did that translate to being one with the electrical grid? She's visibly shaken by this as well. The panel would have you believe that Kunzite just hurled a bolt of electricity straight at her, but he didn't. I'm honestly debating if I should let this one go or not, but it would have been just as easy to have the Sentry react to the power going out than to have Makoto react in such a way. I guess it's supposed to be shorthand for Dark Kingdom involvement, but the Paw Patrol back at base could have let us in on that secret pretty damn quickly. One transformation sequence later, and please note the distinct lack of the moon mask anywhere near Sailor Moon for this entire process. It's the poor thing's last appearance, and it just appears out of thin air to be tossed, which is par for the course, but I'll still miss it. I'm skipping ahead a little bit as an important exchange occurs before this scene unfolds, where Usagi begins to worry about Mamoru's safety. And at the end of the page, we get this nice long text box calling out to Endymion, which is also the first instance we see how Mamoru's reactive instinct to protect Usagi operates. He heard the worry in her heart and it calls out to him. It makes Tuxedo Common's miraculous appearances suddenly make a lot more sense. What doesn't make sense, however, Jupiter now has the ability to carry all the Senshi and perform a super jump from the ground to the top of Tokyo Tower. Could have just jump cut to them at the top of the tower, we were already in a different scene. What is with using Makoto in ways that make no sense in this chapter? Why isn't the ability to jump good on Jupiter's wiki? It's clearly one of her abilities. Who can forget the famous Jupiter jump? Why is only Makoto gaining plot-convenient powers? Why stop there? Why not give Ami a jetpack? Let Rei levitate everyone with her mind. Give Usagi a magical rock that can undo death. Wait a minute. Did Mercury have a jetpack? The Sailor Senshi arrive to confront Kunzite, who decides to use a dark beam to seemingly push Sailor Moon off of Tokyo Tower. Tuxedo Common then catches her somehow. It doesn't really matter. Sailor Moon seems surprised by this, although the dynamic has pretty much been the same since they first met. Sailor Moon decides to take advantage of the romantic backdrop and goes in for a kiss. I will never get tired of how good this panel looks. Tuxedo Common then has some inner dialogue about how different Sailor Moon is every time he meets her. We as an audience have seen her mature just as he has, and this is probably the best time to showcase this change. Considering where their narrative is about to go with the character, it's important that we establish just how noticeably different Sailor Moon is currently to where she was at the start of the series, and Tuxedo Common makes for the best character to acknowledge this change, even more so than Luna. I think it's pretty safe to say that Mamoru wouldn't have fallen in love with the crybaby Usagi we were first introduced to. And while he seemed mildly amused by her while in their personas, he couldn't really stand talking to her for that long to begin with. We are then given a callback to the previous scene with Usagi's father about her struggling with her identity. Although played poorly as a gag, this is supposed to be the narrative payoff, as the person who knows Usagi best is even struggling to comprehend who she really is. If I had to give an overarching theme to this particular act, it would be identity. It's core to the entire chapter. The identity of the biggest mystery of the series is revealed in the arrival of Minako. The identity of the Moon Princess is finally revealed, being the name Princess Serenity, not necessarily Sailor V. We are given a false identity to the Moon Princess, which causes the group to significantly alter their dynamics, as well as their memories being called into question. Who are they? Which is just a microcosm of the bigger existential question Usagi is facing, and who is she? Is she Usagi Tsukino, an average Juban middle school student? Is she Sailor Moon, the pretty soldier of love and justice? Or is she something else entirely? It's actually the core question of the arc from this moment forward, which will get a tad bit more complicated as the arc continues, but it's ultimately resolved when Usagi comes to terms with her identity and chooses who to live as going forward at the story's climax. But for now, she is claiming the role of leader of the Senshi, and as such makes a bold decision to prioritize the mission over her own safety in protecting the princess at any cost. Kunzite charges up for a massive counterattack as she decides to take the brunt end of the attack to save the life of the princess. We do get a lovely panel of Sailor V realizing that perhaps the whole charade was a bad idea in hindsight, with the internal dialogue of her saying, "Damn it," as she immediately tries to remedy the mistake by having the Senshi rush in to protect Sailor Moon, although it's too late as Kunzite's attack is barreling straight towards her. Tuxedo Kamen then gets his moment to protect Sailor Moon. The final panel is this beam of energy striking Tuxedo Kamen. We then see a close-up of Sailor Moon's reaction as he falls into her arms. Thank you for joining me for this study session. Act 8 is actually a mixed bag for me in terms of content. A vast plurality of scenes exists just to go over already established narrative beats without adding anything new to the mix. At least 8 pages within the entire chapter are dedicated to treading old ground, which really didn't need to be discussed. The concepts and ideas that were introduced in this chapter are fantastic additions that really help tie up the loose ends from the first part of the story so that new ideas can form and be introduced and expanded upon. I consider this act to be the true halfway point of the arc in terms of story, and things are just going to continue to get better from this point onwards. Act 9 will pick up the pieces from this chapter, but breaks away from the status quo formula that the series has been so reliant upon to this point. It's a massive turning point for the serialization of the series, and one that I can't wait to discuss with you all. Until then, I've been your host, Simpai, and this is the end of the 7th installment of Sailor Moon Studies.